All right. So last week or so, Sean created, took some of the, not some, but all of the responses from the focus groups that you all facilitated, and he did a great job, obviously. So then the question became, what do we do with all of this information? What is the best way to make sense of it? So for now, we came up with a three-step process that we think that if we started small and divided the work a little bit and sort of tried to make sense of what the participants were telling us, and then move forward and sort of create themes that we can then use to sort of collectively tell a story of what participants wanted us to know based on the questions that we came up with. I believe there were about eight questions or so. So this process is called coding, and simply what that means is coming up with keywords or phrases that you can then use to sort of make sense of your qualitative data. So for example, if we look at the question number 1, which was, what are the most effective ways for you to communicate with your instructor and classmates using technology? Are there tools you wish you could use but do not have access to? If so, what are those tools, and why would you like to use them? And we had participants, John, Andrea, Joanna, and Elena, and their responses. So the first thing that we will do, and I think that based on the document that Sean created, which is this one, if you'd, on the right-hand side, this is where you'd see the participants' names. If I could move this. Here you can see the participants' names and their responses. So the way that I thought, if I had this type of data and I wanted to make sense of it, I thought that it would make sense to present it in this format. So for example, have the participants and their responses. So I took, for example, all of John's responses, put them together. And then Andrea's responses for that question, put them all together. Which is a little bit, it's not that different from what Sean did, but just the way that I thought it would make sense for me if I were to code the data. So after that's done, where we have shown John's responses here, then the next step would be for me to independently read through the responses from all of the participants. And what I would be looking for is keywords or phrases that emerge from their responses. So these are meaningful statements, something that stands out, and then I would write down those keywords or phrases. Now within a passage, for example, if you have John's responses, for example, to that question, several keywords or phrases can emerge from this. It could be laptops, mobile phones, email. So several words and phrases could emerge from John's responses. So after I've read through John's, then I would move to Andrea's. And by the way, I'm noting those keywords and phrases on this side. And then I would move to Andrea, do the same. Now, in terms of those keywords and phrases, you may find that some of the keywords and phrases that you used here when you are reading through John's response may be the same keywords and phrases that you use as you read through Andreas. Some of them may be different, and that's okay. So initially what you're doing is just simply reading through and coming up with those keywords and phrases. So you do that for all of the participants. And hopefully that it's not too many of them for each question. I think maybe about 8 or so. I don't remember how many participants were there. So that's the first step that we will do. So far so good, right? So we are simply just reading through and finding the keywords or phrases. As you read through, you may find that some of those keywords and phrases are repeating from participant to participant. You may find that in each passage or in each paragraph of responses from one participant, for example, you may have more than one keywords or phrases that you feel are important or meaningful to highlight. So after this first step, the next step then would be for us to pair up with a partner. So that partner would have went through the same process, reading the same data. So then what we're doing is we're simply comparing notes. You may find out that, for example, if I was pairing with Sean, that Sean used different words and different phrases, or just use phrases instead of just small words to highlight what he thought was emerging from the data, and that's okay. That we could come up with different coding systems. What's important is for us to then have a conversation about how we got there, and then to reach a consensus about and then the next step would be for us to reach a consensus about the phrases or words that we would like to use to highlight what we think is emerging from the responses. So, for example, I would have my keywords that came from my reading of John's responses and Andrea's responses, and Sean would have the same thing. So then what we would do is we would compare and contrast, talk a little bit about the consensus, reach a consensus about what we both believe the passage represents, or some of the keywords that come from reading the passage. So the idea is to then be able to create a final list of keywords and phrases from the data. So then the last step, at least in this process, would be to finalize the keywords and phrases. So the idea behind counting the frequencies, if for example we have let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 participants, and we have a list of words, because they're answering the same question, right? So we have keywords or phrases for all of them. Then what we want to do is to be able to, excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. That's the fun of working from home. But I'm sorry about that, but anyway. So as I was saying, we have already reached a consensus about the keywords and phrases. For example, we would have keywords and phrases that came from our reading of John's responses, Andrea's responses, and so on and so forth. So then the idea would be to see how frequently some of those phrases were used, or some of those keywords, how frequently they emerge from the data. Count those frequencies. The idea behind doing that is then that we would move from looking at the phrases from individual responses, but now we are trying to combine the responses and create categories that we could then use to describe what we're seeing from the data. So by categories, I mean being able to sort of create or come up with a theme or a category that we believe best represents the combined phrases or words. We may come up with more than one. Obviously, we will come up with more than one set of categories. So to recap on what I've said, the first step that we would do, we would independently read through the responses. For example, John would provide us with a paragraph or so. For example, this is John's response to the question. We would read through John's response, come up with keywords or phrases. There may be more than one. Several keywords or phrases that we believe sort of highlight some of the interesting things that John is saying in his response to the question. We will do the same for the next participant, and so on and so forth. Then the next step would be for us to pair up with another reviewer or another person who's coding. For example, I could pair up with Sean. We would compare how we both independently read the data, reach a consensus on the best way to code or come up with shared keywords or phrases that we can then use to represent what's emerging from the data. After we have done that, then we'll create a final list of keywords or phrases. We will count how often those keywords and phrases emerged. Then the last step would be for us to categorize those keywords and phrases so that we can start making sense of them and creating a theme. So those are the three steps that we would use to make sense of the data. Now, before we move to exercises or activities that could also sort of move us towards a shared understanding of the coding process, are there any questions?
Yeah, I had a question I put in the chat window. So for step one, you're wanting exact words, right? If they said that word, then you would put the word, or can we summarize, or are we put enough the summaries until step 4?
That's, in some cases you could use you could use exact words to code for coding, or you could just come up with a code word that you believe best represents what you're reading. So that's entirely up to each individual, and that's something that we could also, during the consensus phase, that's something that you could also talk about and see if maybe the best way to make sense of each passage is to pick specific codes from the data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're trying to find meaning essentially from
Yes.
step one.
Yes.
Cool.
And I'm going to put something on the chat window. That might also help to, cross it. Okay, let's see. Okay, let me know if you get what I've sent out. So what I would do now is sort of show you an example. Okay, so let's take, for example, that in here, this is somewhat different from the data that we have, because here what they're asking for people to do is to code or make sense of the data by doing what's called line-by-line coding, which we wouldn't be doing. We're not going to be coding line by line. We are going to be reading a paragraph and sort of making sense of what's coming out of an entire post instead of doing line-by-line coding. But the hope is that you begin to get an idea of how the coding process works. So if you could open up the link that I've provided and maybe take a few minutes to first read the passage below about current living home, and then type a word or whatever, a word that you believe summarizes what is happening for each line. When you are finished, click the submit button. So those are very simple 3 steps. And then we'll talk a little bit about the exercise itself and what that means. How does that sound?
Do you want us to do this individually, or should we try and do it all as a group and talk through line by line as a group?
It's fine. We could do that too as a group. We could do that.
That would require people taking their mics off of mute. I don't know if this is outside of our safety zone.
Yeah, that wouldn't be safe at all.
I'd kind of like to do it as a group just for fun.
Yeah, that's fine. So let's start with the first one. It was challenging after living in Italy for 6 months, and then I moved home before. So what do folks think? What's the best word that jumps out?
Or
challenging.
So challenging.
or even living it abroad. I mean, both of those, because the challenge was living abroad, but yeah, we can go with challenge. I'm going to put that in the back of my mind, like just living in Italy.
Yeah.
Being an expatriate.
Right. So I started university. I was used to doing things my own way when it suited me. Independence, maybe? Or
Independence.
okay.
Autonomy.
Autonomy, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, don't judge my spelling out.
Okay.
That sounds about right. So, and not having to tell people where I was going. I was living with friends and, okay.
Yeah, same thing. Kind of independence, seems.
Okay. So I didn't care what I did or where I went. It was really hard to go. It was really hard to go back to sort of.
Like freedom, or like not a routine, something like that.
data. Okay, thinking of others, because mom and dad wanted to know where I was going. Thinking of others, because mom and dad wanted to know where I was going. I don't know.
It's like sense of accountability or something, or being accountable for. How would you say that? I guess.
Yeah, like having responsibilities to others.
Okay, so which one? Accountability or responsibility?
Accountability.
Accountability.
Sounds more professional to me.
Okay. Who with, which was a nightmare. My parents were strict, but I had a lot of.
Oh, what's the?
Maybe.
Like rules or something. What is that?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
Rules.
jeez. Coming up with a blank.
I like rules. You know.
Okay.
I like that. So freedom growing up, a lot of freedom growing up, as long as I didn't overstep the boundaries after I came. I like boundaries. Yeah,
Sure.
freedom growing up, as long as I didn't overstep the boundaries. Boundaries?
Sure.
After I came back from Italy, they realized I was more independent and things changed. Oh, she grew up when she was in Italy.
Change, I think that's something.
Okay, and that changed, and they didn't try and stop me doing things anymore, but they would still let me know if. Sounds like they were giving her some room to be independent. So independent, maybe? Or
Yeah, we have that. And we have change. It's kind of like transition, maybe. Transition to adulthood.
okay. Let's try it with a phrase and see. I don't know.
Okay, so I have a question on that one. Because
Okay.
we're sort of reading into it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So
A little bit.
are we trying to avoid reading into it? In other words, like, is it okay to say, because that strikes me as autonomy again. So one, is it okay if we reuse a keyword? And then two,
Yes.
like how much leeway do we have to read into it? I'm guessing very little.
Well,
A little bit.
that's a good question. And one, in terms of can you reuse keywords? Yes, you can reuse keywords. Two, in terms of how much can we read into it? It's not an easy answer. And I don't know what Newhouse thinks of that as far as how much to read into it.
Well, I mean, that's why this process is so subjective and why I'm not a qualitative specialist.
Yeah,
Because I don't like it.
yeah, it is very subjective, and some people would say that you want to be close to the data. You want to hear what the respondents are saying, and you want to do what they call bracketing, which means sort of removing yourself from judging and just simply reporting what you're seeing. But others
Right.
also disagree with that stance and say, well, yes, bracket yourself, but also you as a human being, you can't really entirely bracket yourself. So as long as you're able to do it within boundaries. So I would say that be subjective but not too subjective. I don't know if I don't have a best answer.
Sure. Well, I mean, the reason I bring this up is because this material is, fairly innocuous to us, but I think we're all going to be predisposed to favoring e-learning, right? And so not to say we're going to, make everything look favorable, but there is that risk, right? Because we're all kind of coming roughly from that same sort of standpoint or attitude. And
Right.
so particularly in dealing with students who maybe were opposed to it, there might be some risk of us kind of, you know what I mean, like accidentally sort of, and maybe this is helped by us having more than one person looking at each, or analyzing each piece. But
Yes, and I think you bring up a very important point, which is that to caution us as we move forward, that we really do need to be careful not to be too subjective in terms of maybe being biased, either by trying to say more
Right.
than what we're actually saying, and hopefully when we pair up, we would have some more conversations about what is actually coming out of the data, and to be open to say, I didn't really see that. This is what I saw.
okay.
Well, I think also if we can all just keep in mind that we might have a predisposed bias toward favoring e-learning, that if we keep that in mind, just being aware of your biases helps you to be less biased in some sense. So
Sure.
I don't know if we can put that reminder on our coding sheets or something.
We should put it somewhere at the top. Be aware of your bias. All
But
right.
I think in terms of
Thanks.
Juan's question, do we want to repeat words? Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? We want to see common themes.
Yes.
So if it seems to fit with what we're seeing in other responses, then sure, using the same words makes sense.
Yes.
But that's also why it's so subjective.
Yes. And those two points I think are very important. The fact that as you read and you see similar things emerging, don't be afraid to use the same words to code, because that's like what Newhouse was saying. That's the point. Is that if something is emerging and it's catching you as, okay, this is important and this is interesting, then by all means you can repeat the same words or the same phrases or the same codes. Okay, so there's the last one. They didn't try and stop me doing things anymore, but they would still let me know if they didn't approve. So approval, well, I don't know. So let's put approval. Well, let's see what so this is where I was challenging autonomy, independence, freedom, accountability, rules, boundaries, change, transitions, adulthood. So now the subjective part. So let's see what the computer says. So we had challenging, they had moving away, autonomy, independence, freedom.
Man, we almost had stuff.
Yeah. Well, where we had approval, they had disapproval. Well, I guess, yeah, that makes sense. Change going up, boundaries, rules, control, accountability. And to one of the questions that one had about reusing phrases. I mean, they're not exact, but you can see that they did here too as well. Control. So
I feel like our answers kind of told the same story as the QDA answers, online QDA, whatever they call it. For the most part, we did get boundaries, so that's cool.
yeah, exactly. So now let's suppose that this was Sean and I doing this, right? So we had read through the passages, we've came up with the keywords or phrases. So then the next step would be for Sean and I to talk about, okay, to reach a consensus and end up with the final list of codes. So for example, if I came up with autonomy and Sean came up with independence, then we'd say, well, do we go with independence or do we go with autonomy? And we then reach a consensus about that as well. Sometimes we may disagree, but the idea is to talk it out and see what makes sense. So that's one example of what we'll be doing. Do we still have a little bit of time? I can show one other example. So in this example, let me give this to you too. This we don't have to do, but so here, sometimes when researchers do this type of coding, sometimes they already have a theory in mind, or they already have a list of codes that they have already created. In our case, we don't have that. And you would read a passage and see if you could assign that passage to a list of codes that are already provided. So I'm just going to do this and see. But you can do it on your own. I just want to see what they have come up with. So the same applies. It's somewhat similar to what we did initially, but in this case, they already had a list of codes. So, long story short, we have a bunch of passages that we want to make sense of. The first step that we are going to do is to read through the passages, to come up with keywords or phrases. Try not to be too subjective. Try to report what you are seeing or what you are feeling or what you are reading from the passage. If you have any concerns, my suggestion would be perhaps to note it down, so that then when you talk with your partner, then you can discuss those concerns and say, you know, this is what I felt or sensed or whatever it may be. Then you can be able to talk about it and reach a consensus. So after we have a list of keywords, then we'll count the frequency of those keywords and see if we could create themes or categories based on those keywords. So that's sort of the simplified version of what I think we could do in terms of our data analysis. So we have we have 8 questions. And my thinking was that, and I don't know what you guys think, because obviously this is just one way. I was thinking that it would make, for me, it made sense to sort of take the responses from each individual and group them together, because essentially, even though there were some prompts, the idea was for them to answer one question. So I thought it would make sense to sort of combine all the responses for each individual initially, and then sort of read through that individual's response and, like I said, come up with keywords. And then when we are done, then we will be able to take the list of all the keywords and phrases, see how often they came out, and see if we could take some of those and categorize them or create categories, and then create themes. So in terms of laying it out, I thought that it would be easier to do it this way. But that's also open to discussion.
I think that's fine. There were a few instances where a participant was responding to another participant or to the moderator's prompts, but I mean, prompts weren't all that common. They weren't uncommon or anything, but yeah, I think it might make sense.
Yeah.
So do we want to pair off then?
Well, before we do that, Sean, are we including the moderator's responses, or are we taking them out?
I'm sorry, which responses?
The prompts from those who are facilitating, because I think in some cases that's true.
Sure.
I don't want us to make any mistake where some of us are including them and some of.
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, you wouldn't. I put the prompt in sometimes just because there were answers that were rather specific and to just provide some context. And so yeah, don't use the prompt as part of the analytics necessarily, just the response. But and you can always just keep it out entirely. And we have this document here, this Excel transcription sheet, in case you need to refer back to, like, what was that student talking about? Maybe you could check if the student was prompted by something.
And another thing to bear in mind is when we do the write-ups, when we write a report, sometimes when you tell a story, it's good to give examples. For example, if you said, a lot of students just said this thing sucks. Well, the next question might be, well, do you have a code? Do you have some exact words that could sort of put this into proper perspective? So in some cases, if there are those types of statements that really stand out and give proper perspective, highlight some of those so that we can be able to provide some examples. So, Dr. Nufa, I believe the stage is now yours.
Sure. So the last step is just to pair off in groups, I think. I mean, for this meeting, at least.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking having 8 questions. We can have 4 groups, each little group where each companionship does a couple of questions. Have Lord, myself, Noel, or Newhouse, are we calling her Newhouse during this meeting? And Kim. We can each pull on a partner for ourselves, and so I mean, if it doesn't matter, Lord, I can give you first 2 questions. I'll take 3 and 4. Newhouse can take 5 and 6, and just kidding, and Juan. And so I mean, Tracy, you're on the call. If you want to work with me, I'll partner up with you, unless you have an objection.
Absolutely not, because I have. Some of this has been Greek to me.
That's why you need somebody to explain it to you. To go in. Are you saying you don't have a problem with that, or you do have a problem with varying?
I have no problem with being partnered up with anybody. I work with anybody because I'm like, just from the understanding that I got some of this, all I just need to know is what I'm supposed to look at. I kind of got an idea of what he's talking about for the qualitative stuff and trying to be objective, but I'm very inexperienced in disaggregating this type of data.
Okay.
So I don't care who. Now I was working with you, Sean.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
we'll figure it out.
That's fine. I mean, whoever. I don't care. Just as long as you don't put somebody with me that doesn't know as much as I don't know. That's all.
And we'll
fine.
provide some other examples as well, very simplified examples, and I'll find some videos as well that I think are very straightforward in terms of what to look for and in terms of the keywords, because the idea really is to just read through the passage, see which words or which phrases sort of jump out to sort of give meaning to that passage. That's all we're interested in at this point, is just to see what comes out as meaningful, something that stands out in terms of that individual's response to the question.
Yeah, I think it'll be fine. At least voice through emails. So just jotting down randomly, I put up some pairs. Lord and Nicole, if you guys want to work together. I don't think Nicole made the call. She emailed me, but I'm recording the session, so it's good. If you guys want to take number 1 and 2, Tracy and I can take 3 and 4. Noel, if you want to work with Mike, he's fun to work with, 5 and 6. And then Juan and Mark, if you guys want to cover 7 and 8. Does that sound okay? It's just a random pairing.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Put that into it. All right.
Juan knows what he's doing, right?
Oh, Juan's awesome.
Questions that I don't.
I think we'll be good.
I think it's fine. And there's wiggle room here. This is our pilot study. We're figuring things out, and so it's not an exact science yet. So
Yeah, it's not an exact science. That's why it's quite.
it's never an exact science. Qualitative data. I tried to eschew qualitative data throughout my entire doctorate program.
I don't think we teach quality for IO and BP. We've done a bit of content analysis, but I don't think we went as deep as maybe the clinical folks would do in other folks. But I think for us, we really didn't go far enough in qualitative analysis.
I think we're just so comfortable having solid data to back up whatever we're saying. If we're giving a survey, like an engagement survey to an organization, they don't want fluffy, interpretations. They just want hard feedback. What's the raw data? And when we give our presentations, we want to support it with, you can question my opinions and my thoughts, but you can't question this point because I ran a chi-square, and I have the data here. I think that's kind of the mentality of IO.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. Okay, so Lord, do you want to put up that document into Basecamp whenever it's ready?
Okay.
The document you're showing us.
Okay.
And I'll email you these pairings so that when you put up that document, you can just put a post.
I was going to say I can send it to you to see if we need to clean it up anymore. That then
Sure.
you can.
Why don't you just send it to Newhouse and Juan and I for one last, glance through, and we'll get that up to Basecamp today for everybody.
Okay.
All right, any other questions or concerns?
Yeah. What are the deadlines we're looking at?
Oh yeah, so I was just thinking that as I have my own. So if we can do a week or so with our little groups, our pairs, looking at the 2 questions, and then come back next week. And so next week we can look at the high-level central themes and combine all of our data, all of our qualitative analyses to find if there are any themes. So this week is the next 7 days are just working in your pair, looking over the 2 questions, and then the week after that we'll just meet through Basecamp and as a large group and chat about the overall themes and stuff. Sound good?
Yeah. Just a heads up, I can't make our next Thursday meeting, but obviously I'll have the stuff done by then.
It's okay. I think for the week after, largely we'll just be Basecamping it.
Okay.
So it'll be mostly asynchronous after for the next 2 weeks. I think mostly this will be asynchronous unless you meet up like with your partner.
Right.
On a
All
call.
right. Thanks.
Cool. I don't have anything else. Any other questions or concerns before we go? And thanks, Lord, for all the work that you've did this week, getting this ready.
No, not a problem.
And Noel for your feedback as well.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Oh, my very last thing that I'll mention, as you're doing your analysis from this point forward, if you write anything up, don't try and sound smart at all. Just write it in a way that your niece or nephew who's in 5th grade can understand. And that's not saying that Glenn and Rick and whoever, Eileen they're not dummies or anything, but they also don't have time to sift through data. We have to present this in a way that it's not data necessarily. It's just us chatting about the chats that we had with the participants in the focus group. So I don't want to say dumb it down, but just don't worry about it being elaborate and academic and scholarly. That's not the purpose of this project. Explain it in the way that you can explain it to your son and your daughter and your brother and your uncle at the dinner table at Thanksgiving. That's the best I can come up with. Great. So if there aren't any other questions or concerns, I'll let you guys go. Thank you all for attending the meeting, and I'll put this recording up on Basecamp too, because there are a couple people who needed it recorded.
Thanks, Sean.
Talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.